Chapter 1. Ted on the road. Theodore Davenport. Ted to everyone except his mother when she was in lecture mode. Sat in the corner of the airport lounge nursing a coffee that tasted like someone had whispered the word bean over hot water. He stared at the departure board, watching the blinking letters like they were mocking him. Another flight, another city, another hotel room with a bedspread that looked like it had survived 3 decades of questionable decisions. He sighed and muttered under his breath, "System integrity tester. Sounds glamorous until you realize it's just me, a laptop, and a parade of hotel managers who think Wi-Fi is a personality trait." The man across from him glanced up from his phone, gave Ted a polite smile, and went back to scrolling. Ted returned the favor with a nod, then pulled out his camera from the bag at his feet. It wasn't part of the job, it was part of his sanity. Photography was his escape hatch from the monotony of system audits and endless travel. Landscapes, architecture, candid shots of people living their lives, those were his favorite. He liked imagining the stories behind the snapshots. Sometimes funny, sometimes bittersweet, always better than debugging a firewall at midnight. He flipped through the photos from yesterday. A street musician playing a saxophone like his soul depended on it. A couple arguing over a map. A kid chasing pigeons with the determination of a future Olympian. Ted smiled. These were real moments. Not curated. Not filtered. Not swiped left or right. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Mom. Theodore, have you eaten something that isn't airport food?" Ted chuckled. "Of course, Mom. I had a salad yesterday. Came in a box, but it had lettuce. That counts." He typed back, "Yes, Mom. I'm fine. Heading to Denver. Audit at the Grand Stay Hotel." Her reply was instant. "You're 35. You should settle down. Find someone nice. Stop living out of a suitcase." Ted stared at the screen, lips twitching. If only it were that simple. He'd tried the fairy tale once. At 24, he thought forever was a real thing. Until he overheard his fiancée laughing over tea with her mother, saying, "Don't worry, Mom. He's just my practice husband." The words had sliced through him like glass. He didn't yell, didn't beg. Just walked out and sent an email to the entire wedding guest list. "The wedding is cancelled. I refuse to marry a woman who is treating me like practice for her real wedding." Short, brutal, honest. That was 11 years ago, and the scar still itched sometimes. He shook off the memory and focused on the present. The loudspeaker announced boarding for his flight. Ted packed up his camera, slung his bag over his shoulder, and headed toward the gate. Another city, another hotel system to test. Another night alone. The plane was half empty, which meant Ted scored a window seat without having to elbow anyone for it. He watched the clouds roll by, his thoughts drifting like the landscape below. He wasn't against love. He just didn't trust it anymore. Not the modern version, anyway. Swipe culture had turned dating into a lottery of bad coffee dates and unrealistic expectations. Ted had better things to do with his time, like photography, like finding the perfect angle of sunlight hitting a building at dawn. When the plane landed, he grabbed his bag and headed for the shuttle. Denver greeted him with crisp air and mountains in the distance, like nature was showing off. On the ride to the hotel, Ted spotted a park through the window. Kids running, parents chatting, a scout troop wrestling with tents. He smiled. He remembered his own scout days, learning knots, earning badges, feeling like the world was an adventure waiting to happen. Then his eyes caught something that made him pause. A woman in her early 30s, struggling with a tent pole like it was a personal vendetta. Beside her, a boy, maybe 7, watched with wide-eyed concern. Ted's photographer instincts kicked in. He raised his camera, zoomed in, and snapped a shot. The woman's expression was a mix of determination and frustration, her hair escaping its ponytail in rebellious strands. The boy held a manual upside down, clearly no help at all. Ted chuckled softly. "That's a story," he murmured. He didn't know then that this snapshot would change everything. Chapter 2. The park encounter. Ted had planned to head straight to the hotel, run diagnostics, and maybe reward himself with a steak dinner if the system didn't implode. But the park he'd glimpsed from the shuttle window tugged at him like a loose thread. He told the driver to stop at the next corner, slung his camera over his shoulder, and walked toward the laughter and chaos. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and distant barbecue. Kids darted between picnic tables, parents hovered like anxious satellites, and in the middle of it all, there she was, the woman from his photo, still locked in mortal combat with the tent. Ted slowed his pace, amused. The tent looked less like a shelter and more like modern art, a collapsed triangle with poles sticking out at angles that defied geometry. The boy beside her held a manual upside down, his expression solemn, as if reading ancient scripture. Ted couldn't resist. "You know," he said, stepping closer, "I'm pretty sure that's not how the scouts envisioned it." The woman spun around, startled. Her eyes, hazel, bright, and currently narrowed, met his. "Excuse me?" He grinned, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Sorry. Couldn't help noticing your tent is avant-garde." She blinked, then laughed. A quick, genuine sound that made Ted's chest feel oddly lighter. "Avant-garde? That's a nice way of saying it looks like a disaster." "Disaster is such a harsh word," Ted said. crouching to inspect the mess. I call it interpretive camping. The boy snorted. Mom, he's right. It looks weird. Thank you, Evan, she said dryly, brushing hair from her face. As if I didn't know. Ted glanced at the boy. Evan, huh? You a scout? The kid nodded proudly. Just joined. We're supposed to camp next weekend. Mom said she'd help me practice. Ted looked at her again. And Mom is regretting that promise? She sighed, smiling despite herself. Completely. I'm more of an indoor enthusiast. Ted chuckled. Well, lucky for you, I was a scout once. Not tying champion. Tent whisperer. Badge collector extraordinaire. Her eyebrows lifted. Tent whisperer? Is that a real thing? Absolutely, Ted said deadpan. Very exclusive club. Membership requires surviving 3 thunderstorms and 1 raccoon invasion. She laughed again, and Ted felt that strange tug in his chest. He crouched lower. Mind if I help? She hesitated, then nodded. Please, before I commit a felony against this tent. They worked side by side, Ted guiding Evan through the steps, explaining how poles fit into sleeves, how tension mattered. Evan listened like Ted was revealing state secrets. The woman, Claire, as he learned when Evan introduced her, watched with a mix of relief and curiosity. So, Claire said, handing Ted a steak, do you rescue random strangers at parks often? Only when they're in mortal peril, Ted replied. And when the tent is crying for help. She smirked. You're funny. Funny and useful, Ted said. Rare combination. Modest too, she teased. Ted grinned. I try. When the tent finally stood upright, Evan cheered like they'd won a championship. Claire looked at Ted, her smile warm and a little tired, the kind of tired that comes from doing everything alone and still showing up. Thank you, she said softly. Seriously, you saved me. Ted shrugged, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Happy to help. Scouts deserve a fighting chance. Evan tugged Claire's sleeve. Can he come camping with us? Claire laughed. I think he has a job, buddy. Ted smiled. He's right. I do. But hey, if you need more tent therapy, I'm around for a few days. Her eyes flickered with something. Interest? Wariness? Ted couldn't tell. He just knew he didn't want to leave yet. Chapter 3. Coffee and Complications. Ted hadn't planned on lingering at the park, but after the tent triumph, Claire insisted on buying him coffee as a thank you. He almost said no, his schedule was tight, but something about her smile made him reconsider. Besides, coffee was neutral. Coffee didn't mean anything, right? They walked to a small cafe across the street, Evan skipping ahead like he just recruited Ted into the Scouts. The place smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon, a welcome upgrade from the airport's sad excuse for caffeine. Claire ordered a latte, Evan demanded hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, and Ted went for black coffee, simple, no fuss. They settled at a corner table, Evan busy rearranging sugar packets into a fortress. Claire leaned back, exhaling. You have no idea how much you saved me today. Ted smiled. Looked like you were about to declare war on that tent. I was, she admitted. I'm hopeless with this stuff. Evan wanted to join Scouts, and I thought, how hard can it be? Turns out very hard. Ted chuckled. You're doing great. Most parents would have just said no. Her eyes softened. He loves it. I want him to have that adventure, you know? Even if I'm completely out of my element. Ted nodded, feeling a flicker of admiration. That's rare these days. People usually pick what's easy. Claire tilted her head. You sound like you've thought about that a lot. Maybe, Ted said, stirring his coffee. I travel a lot. I see people cutting corners everywhere, relationships included. Her brows lifted. Relationships. Ted hesitated, then shrugged. Let's just say I've learned the hard way that trust isn't exactly trending. Claire studied him for a beat, then smiled faintly. Sounds like a story. Ted grinned wryly. One I'm not sure pairs well with coffee. She laughed softly. Fair enough. Evan popped up, waving a marshmallow stick like a sword. Mom, can we go camping this weekend? Claire groaned. Buddy, I have work, Ted interrupted gently. You know, if you need a hand, I'm around for a few days. Claire blinked. You'd help us camp? Ted shrugged, trying to sound casual. Why not? I've survived raccoons. I can handle a weekend. Evan cheered like Ted had just agreed to lead an expedition to Mars. Claire smiled, but there was hesitation in her eyes. A flicker of caution Ted recognized all too well. Thanks, she said finally. I'll think about it. As they left the cafe, Ted felt something he hadn't felt in years. A pull. Not just attraction, but curiosity. Claire wasn't polished or rehearsed. She was real. And that scared him more than he wanted to admit. Chapter 4. Backstory unveiled. Ted sat on the edge of the hotel bed. Laptop open, system diagnostics running in the background. Lines of code scrolled like an endless mantra. Secure, verify, patch. It was the same routine he'd done 100 times. But tonight his mind wasn't on firewalls or encryption. It was on Claire, and the way her laugh had slipped past his defenses like sunlight through blinds. He closed the laptop and reached for his camera instead. The photo from the park glowed on the screen. Claire, hair escaping her ponytail, brow furrowed in determination. Evan clutching the manual like it held the secrets of the universe. Ted smiled, then frowned. He wasn't supposed to feel this. Interested. He had rules. Rules kept things simple. No attachments. No risks. No repeating history. History. That word tasted bitter. He was 24, full of hope, and convinced fairy tales were real. He had the ring, the venue, the guest list. He had a fiancée who smiled like summer and said all the right things, until the afternoon he walked into her apartment and heard laughter drifting from the kitchen. He froze at the doorway, unseen, listening. "Don't worry, Mom," her voice said, light and casual. "He's just my practice husband. When I find someone I'm really ready to settle down with, well, divorces happen all the time." The words hit like a punch, but it was the laugh that gutted him. The dismissive, shared laugh between mother and daughter, like his love was a joke told over tea. Ted could have stormed in, demanded answers, begged her to mean something. But what was the point? She wasn't looking at him as her future. He was a placeholder. Convenience. He turned and left without a word. The email he sent to the entire guest list was short, brutal, and honest. "The wedding is cancelled. I refuse to marry a woman who is treating me like practice for her real wedding." No rants. No drama. Just truth. She didn't let go easily. There were calls, texts, tears, promises, then threats, then a restraining order. By the time it ended, Ted was done with crazy and done with blind trust. Ted rubbed his temples, the memory sharp even after all these years. He wasn't bitter anymore, not exactly. Just cautious. Love wasn't a game he had any chance of winning. Not in a world where swipes replaced sincerity and commitment was a novelty. He glanced at the photo again. Claire didn't look like someone playing games. She looked tired, determined, real. And that scared him more than he wanted to admit. His phone buzzed, a system alert. Ted sighed, shoved the past back into its box, and opened his laptop. Work was safe. Work didn't laugh behind his back. But as the code scrolled, his mind wandered to a park, a tent, and a woman who might just rewrite his rules. Chapter 5. Chance meeting number 2. Ted had planned a quick grocery run, grab bottled water, protein bars, maybe something green to convince his mother he wasn't living entirely on caffeine. The store was quiet, the kind of suburban calm that made him feel like an intruder in someone else's routine. He turned down the cereal aisle and froze. Claire. She was standing in front of a wall of brightly colored boxes, looking like she'd wandered into a philosophical debate. Evan was beside her, bouncing on his toes, chanting, "Frosted Flakes! Frosted Flakes!" like it was a battle cry. Ted smiled before he could stop himself. "You know," he said, strolling closer, "I hear Frosted Flakes are the gateway cereal. Start there, and next thing you know, you're hoarding marshmallow charms." Claire whipped around, eyes widening. "Ted. In the flesh," he said, holding up a basket like a peace offering. "Not stalking you, I swear." She laughed, a little breathless. "I didn't think you were. Just surprised." Evan grinned. "Hey, tent guy." Ted chuckled. "That's me. Tent guy, serial consultant, occasional IT wizard." Claire shook her head, smiling. "You're everywhere." "Denver's a small world," Ted said. "Or maybe fate really wants you to pick the right cereal." Evan tugged Claire's sleeve. "Mom, can we get the big box?" Claire sighed. "Fine. But you're eating it, not just the marshmallows." Ted leaned in conspiratorially. "Pro tip, they never eat the flakes. It's all about the sugar." Claire laughed again, and Ted felt that same pull, warm, unexpected, dangerous. They moved toward the checkout together, conversation flowing easily. "So," Claire said, "do you always rescue strangers and then run into them at grocery stores?" "Only the ones who look like they're losing a fight with breakfast," Ted replied. She smirked. "You're funny. Funny and useful," he said. "Rare combination." "Modest too," she teased. Ted grinned. "I try." At the register, Evan dumped a mountain of candy bars onto the belt. Claire groaned. "Put half of those back." Ted leaned down to Evan. "Negotiation tip. Offer to share one with your mom. Works every time." Evan's eyes lit up. "Mom, I'll share." Claire rolled her eyes but smiled. "Fine. One." Ted winked at Evan. "See? Teamwork." As they walked out, Claire hesitated. "Thanks for making grocery shopping less painful." "Anytime," Ted said, "though I think Evan did most of the heavy lifting." Evan grinned. "You should come camping with us." Claire shot Ted a look, half amused, half cautious. "He's persistent." Ted shrugged, smiling. "Can't blame him. Camping builds character." Claire laughed softly, but her eyes held something else. A flicker of curiosity, maybe hope. Ted felt it too, and it scared him more than he wanted to admit. Chapter 6. The photography connection. Saturday morning arrived crisp and golden, the kind of day that begged for adventure. Ted had finished his system checks early and found himself back at the park, camera slung over his shoulder, pretending he was just there for the scenery. Truth? He hoped Claire and Evan would show. They did. Evan spotted him first, sprinting across the grass like a pint-sized linebacker. "Tent guy!" he yelled. earning a few curious glances from nearby parents. Ted laughed, crouching to meet him halfway. Hey Scout, ready for round 2? Evan nodded vigorously. Mom says we're practicing knots today, but knots are boring. Claire arrived a moment later, hair pulled into a messy bun, sunglasses perched on her head. She looked tired, but in that graceful way that made Ted's chest tighten. Sorry about the shouting, she said, smiling. He's excited. Excitement's good, Ted said. Better than tent warfare. She laughed softly. True. Evan tugged Ted's sleeve. What's that? He pointed to the camera hanging from Ted's neck. This. Ted lifted it. My secret weapon. Cool. Can I try? Ted glanced at Claire, who shrugged. As long as you don't break it. Ted grinned. Deal. He knelt, adjusting the strap so it fit Evan's small frame. Okay, rule number 1, don't drop it. Rule number 2, find something interesting. Evan squinted through the lens, spinning in a slow circle. What's interesting? Anything that makes you look twice, Ted said. Could be a tree, a bug, your mom laughing. Claire chuckled. Careful. I'm not photogenic. Ted raised an eyebrow. That's a lie, and I have evidence. He pulled up the photo from the tent fiasco. Claire groaned, covering her face. Oh no, delete that. Not a chance, Ted said, grinning. It's perfect. Real. Her hands dropped slowly, and for a moment, her eyes met his warm, curious, unguarded. Ted felt something shift like gravity had tilted. Evan snapped a picture of a squirrel mid-leap and whooped with triumph. Got it. Ted laughed. Nice shot. You've got an eye for action. Claire smiled, watching Evan beam. He's going to want a camera now. Could be worse, Ted said. At least it's not a drum set. She laughed, and Ted soaked in the sound like sunlight. He wanted to keep her laughing. He wanted more than he should. As they packed up, Claire hesitated. Thanks for this. He had fun. Ted shrugged, casual on the outside, anything but on the inside. Me too. Evan grinned. You're coming camping, right? Claire shot Ted a look, half amused, half wary. He's relentless. Ted smiled. I like relentless. Her lips curved, and for a heartbeat, Ted wondered if maybe, just maybe, his rules were about to break. Chapter 7. Ted's rule tested. Ted's phone buzzed just as he finished tightening the last bolt on the hotel's server rack. He glanced at the screen. An urgent message from corporate. System audit in Phoenix. Departure. Tomorrow. He exhaled slowly. Of course, the universe had impeccable timing. He'd just started feeling something. Something he hadn't felt in years. And now he was about to vanish into another city, another hotel, another routine. He packed up his tools, but his thoughts weren't on encryption protocols. They were on Claire, her laugh, her stubborn determination, the way she looked at Evan like he was her whole world. Ted had rules for a reason. No attachments, no promises he couldn't keep. He'd learned the hard way what distance did to trust. Still, as he walked back to his room, the question gnawed at him. Should he ask her out before leaving? Just coffee, dinner, something simple, something that didn't feel like a gamble with his peace. Claire sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, invoices scattered like confetti. Evan was in the living room, humming while building a Lego fortress. She should have been focused on work, but her mind kept drifting to Ted. Tent guy, grocery store guy, the man who made her laugh when she felt like collapsing. She liked him, more than she wanted to admit. But liking someone came with risks. Risks she'd sworn off after her ex walked out, leaving her to juggle bills and bedtime stories alone. Ted seemed steady, kind, funny. But he traveled. A lot. And Claire knew what distance did. It hollowed things out until there was nothing left but excuses. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ted. Hey, got called out for another audit. Leaving tomorrow. But, would you want to grab dinner tonight? Claire stared at the screen, heart thudding. Dinner. Just dinner. She could say yes. She could say no. Either way, something would change. He stared at his phone after hitting send, pulse ticking faster than he liked. This wasn't him. He didn't chase. He didn't risk. But Claire wasn't like anyone else. She was real. And that scared him more than the memory of his past. Chapter 8. The almost date. Ted arrived at the restaurant early, scanning the cozy booths and warm lighting. He'd picked a place that wasn't too fancy, just comfortable, with good food and no pretension. Dinner with Claire. Just dinner. He kept repeating that like a mantra, trying to ignore the flutter in his chest. The door opened, and Claire walked in with Evan. Ted blinked. Hey, he said, standing. You brought backup. Claire looked apologetic, cheeks flushed. I'm so sorry. My sitter canceled last minute. I didn't want to bail on you. But, Ted grinned, cutting her off. No problem. I like backup. Makes me feel important. Evan beamed. Do they have fries? Ted laughed. Kid. They have fries that could win awards. They settled into a booth. Evan wedged between them like a pint-sized chaperone. Ted handed him a menu. Pick your weapon. Evan scanned the options with grave seriousness. Burger. Extra ketchup. Solid choice, Ted said. Classic. Respect. Claire shook her head, smiling. You two are ridiculous. Ridiculously hungry, Ted corrected. Big difference. As they waited for food, conversation flowed easily. Evan told stories about scouts, how he earned his first badge, how he wanted to build a campfire big enough to roast a dinosaur. Ted played along, offering tips on marshmallow strategy and raccoon defense. Claire watched them, her smile softening. Ted wasn't just humoring Evan. He was listening, engaging, making the kid feel like his stories mattered. That did something to her heart she hadn't expected. When the food arrived, Evan dove into his burger like a warrior. Claire laughed. Sorry, he eats like he's in a competition. Ted grinned. Hey, I respect commitment. Claire sipped her drink, studying him. You're good with kids. Ted shrugged, a little embarrassed. I was one once. Still am. Some days. She smiled. That's not a bad thing. After dinner, Evan insisted on dessert. Ted backed him up, claiming it was a moral obligation. Claire rolled her eyes but gave in. They shared a giant sundae, laughter spilling like melted chocolate. When they finally stepped outside, Evan skipped ahead, leaving Ted and Claire in a quiet pocket of night air. Thanks, she said softly, for not making this weird. Ted smiled. Weird's overrated. I had fun. Her eyes met his, warm and searching. For a moment, Ted thought about leaning in, closing the space between them. But then Evan called out, and the moment slipped away like smoke. As Ted watched them walk to their car, his chest tightened. He'd broken his rule tonight, and he wasn't sure he regretted it. Chapter 9. Distance Dilemma. Ted stared at his hotel room ceiling like it had answers. Didn't. It just had a suspicious stain shaped vaguely like Nebraska. He rolled over, grabbed his phone, and stared at Claire's last message. Claire. Evan says hi. He's practicing knots. They look like spaghetti. Ted smiled despite himself. He typed back. Tell him spaghetti knots are advanced level. Scouts usually save those for the Olympics. 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. Ted waited, feeling oddly nervous for a man who routinely handled system crashes without breaking a sweat. Finally, her reply came, you're funny. He thinks you should write the scout manual. Ted chuckled, thumbs hovering. Only if it comes with a raccoon survival chapter. He hit send, then tossed the phone aside. Why did this feel so complicated? It was just texting. Except it wasn't. Every word felt like a step onto thin ice. He liked Claire. Liked her more than he wanted to admit, but he was hundreds of miles away, and history had taught him what distance did to trust. He chewed it up and spat it out. Claire sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, bills scattered like confetti. Evan was in the living room, tying knots around the coffee table legs like he was preparing for a hostage situation. She smiled faintly at Ted's message, then frowned at herself. Why was she smiling? He was just a guy she met at a park. A guy who helped with a tent. A guy who made her laugh. Who listened. Who didn't look at her like she was failing. Her phone buzzed again. Ted, how's your day? She hesitated, then typed, busy. Work, bills, knots everywhere. You? His reply was quick. Hotel audits. Glamorous life. I just told a manager their Wi-Fi password shouldn't be password 123. Claire laughed out loud. Evan peeked in. What's funny? Nothing, she said too quickly, cheeks warm. Go practice your knots. Ted stared at her laugh emoji like it was a trophy. He wanted to keep the conversation going. But what did you say after Wi-Fi jokes? He typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, wish I was back there. Beats staring at hotel wallpaper. He froze after hitting send. Too much? Too honest? He wasn't sure anymore. Her reply came slower this time. We'd like that too. Evan keeps asking when you're coming back. Ted exhaled, tension easing. Then the old fear crept in. What if this turned into another long-distance disaster? What if he let himself hope and ended up gutted again? He stared at the phone, thumb hovering over the keyboard, and thought, do I take the risk? Or do I play it safe? Chapter 10. The X Factor. Claire had expected the scout meeting to be routine, knots, badges, Evan's endless enthusiasm. What she didn't expect was to see him leaning against her car when she walked out of the community center. Her ex Derek looked exactly as she remembered. Charming smile, expensive jacket, and that air of casual arrogance that used to make her stomach flip, in a bad way. Claire froze, keys clutched like a weapon. Claire, Derek said smoothly, pushing off the car. You look great. She forced a polite smile. What do you want, Derek? Just to talk. His eyes flicked toward Evan, who was bounding out the door with his troop leader. And maybe see my son. Claire stiffened. You haven't called in months. Derek shrugged, like time was a minor inconvenience. Work's been crazy. But I'm here now. Before Claire could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. Everything okay? Ted's tone was calm, but his presence was solid, like a wall she didn't know she needed. He stepped up beside her, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes steady on Derek. Claire exhaled, relief washing over her. Yeah, fine. Derek's smile faltered as he looked Ted over. Friend of yours. Ted extended a hand, polite but firm. Ted Davenport. Derek shook it, his grip a little too tight. Derek. Ted didn't flinch. Nice night for scouts. Derek smirked. Guess you're the new guy. Ted smiled faintly. Guess so. Evan ran up, oblivious to the tension. Mom, did you see my knot? It's perfect. Claire crouched, hugging him. I did, buddy. Great job. Derek cleared his throat. Hey, champ. Evan blinked. Oh, hi. Claire straightened, voice cool. Derek was just leaving. Derek's jaw tightened. We'll talk later. Sure, Claire said, tone like ice. He walked off, and Ted waited until Derek's car disappeared before speaking. Claire sighed. Unfortunately. Ted nodded slowly. He always show up like that? Only when he wants something, she muttered. Usually when I've finally got things under control. Ted studied her for a moment, then said softly, You handled it. She laughed bitterly. Barely. Ted's voice was calm, steady. You don't have to handle everything alone. Claire looked at him, really looked, and for a heartbeat, the noise of the parking lot faded. Ted wasn't flashy or smooth. He was solid, reliable, the opposite of Derek in every way. And that scared her, because she wanted to believe it. As they walked to their cars, Evan chattered about badges, completely unaware of the storm that had just passed. Ted opened Claire's door for her, casual like it was nothing. But to Claire, it felt like everything. Chapter 11. The big gesture. The scout event was buzzing with energy. Kids racing between tents, parents juggling snacks and schedules. Claire stood near the registration table, scanning for Evan, who had vanished into a sea of khaki uniforms and merit badges. She was tired, but proud. Evan was thriving, and that mattered more than anything. Claire. The voice behind her was warm, familiar. She turned and froze. Ted. But not just Ted. Ted holding a leather-bound photo album, the kind that looked like it belonged in a keepsake box. He wore that easy smile, the one that made her stomach flip in ways she didn't want to analyze. Hey, she said, trying to sound casual. What's that? He held it out. Thought Evan might like this. And maybe you too. Claire opened the album, and her breath caught. Each page held moments from the past week. Evan grinning with the camera, the squirrel mid-leap, the triumphant tent standing tall, Claire laughing with her hair in disarray. Real moments. Honest. Beautiful. Ted. Her voice faltered. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he said simply. You too. You make good pictures. She laughed softly, blinking back something that felt suspiciously like tears. You're something else. Ted shrugged, but his eyes were steady. Look, I know I'm not great at this, at whatever this is, but I like spending time with you. And Evan. And I don't want to pretend I don't. Claire stared at him, heart thudding. Ted. He took a breath, words slow, deliberate. I've been scared for a long time. Scared of trusting, of getting burned again. But you, his voice softened. You make me want to try. For a moment, the world narrowed to just them. The laughter, the chaos, the kids shouting in the background fading like static. Claire felt the weight of her own fears. The walls she'd built after Derek, after disappointment. And yet, here was Ted, steady and sincere, offering something real. She smiled, shaky but genuine. You're not the only one who's scared. Ted's lips curved. Guess that makes two of us. Guess so, she whispered. Evan barreled into them, clutching a badge like it was gold. Mom, look, I got my knot badge. Claire laughed, hugging him tight. Ted crouched, high-fiving Evan. Nice work, Scout. And as Claire watched them, her son beaming, Ted smiling like he belonged, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe trust wasn't a gamble. Maybe it was a choice. Chapter 12. Practice makes perfect. The Scout Award ceremony was winding down, parents gathering folding chairs, kids clutching badges like treasure. Claire stood near the stage, Evan bouncing beside her, his grin wide enough to power a small city. Ted was there too, camera in hand, snapping candid shots like he was collecting joy. When Evan dashed off to show his badge to a friend, Claire turned to Ted. You didn't have to come today. Ted lowered the camera, his smile easy. I wanted to. Besides, I had to see the knot champion in action. Claire laughed softly. He's proud. He should be, Ted said. You should be too. She looked at him, really looked, and felt that familiar tug. The one that had been growing since the park, since the grocery store, since every moment he'd shown up without asking for anything in return. You're good with him, she said quietly. Ted shrugged, but his eyes held hers. He's a great kid. And you're doing an amazing job. Her throat tightened. Compliments from Derek had always come with strings. Ted's words felt like truth, simple, solid, no agenda. Thank you, she whispered. They walked toward the parking lot, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold. Evan ran ahead, waving his badge like a victory flag. Claire glanced at Ted, nerves fluttering like moths. So, she said, what happens now? Ted smiled faintly. Now, I take a lot of pictures of mountains before my next audit. And I hope you'll let me call you. Claire blinked. You want to keep in touch? I want more than that, Ted said, voice steady. I want to see where this goes. No games. No practice runs. Just real. Her heart thudded. Ted. He grinned, a little self-deprecating. Guess I'm done being practice material. Claire laughed, the sound breaking through her fear like sunlight through clouds. Good, she said softly. Because I'm not practicing either. Evan shouted from the car. Mom, hurry up. Claire smiled, turning back to Ted. Looks like my ride's impatient. Ted chuckled. Mine too. He lifted his camera, snapped a quick photo of her laughing in the golden light. For the album. She shook her head, smiling. You're impossible. Maybe, he said, but I'm hoping you'll give me a chance anyway. Claire hesitated only a second before nodding. Yeah, she whispered. I think I will. As she walked away, Ted felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not doubt, but hope. Real solid hope. Maybe love wasn't a gamble after all. Maybe it was a choice. And for the first time in a long time, Ted was ready to choose. Epilogue. Not again. The campsite was alive with laughter, crackling fire, and the faint smell of burnt marshmallows. Ted sat on a folding chair, camera resting on his knee, watching Evan wrestle with a stubborn tent pole like it was a dragon. Claire knelt beside him, hair escaping her braid, muttering under her breath. Why do these poles hate me? She grumbled. Ted grinned. They don't hate you. They just respect your authority, in a very passive-aggressive way. Claire shot him a look. You're enjoying this? Absolutely, Ted said, deadpan. Watching you declare war on camping gear is my new favorite hobby. She laughed, tossing a stake at him. Fine, tent whisperer. Show me your magic. Ted crouched beside her, guiding her hands as they slid the pole into place. Their fingers brushed, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just them. The firelight, the laughter, the quiet hum of something new and steady between them. See, Ted said softly. Perfect. Claire smiled, eyes warm. Not bad. Evan popped up, triumphant. We did it. Ted ruffled his hair. Teamwork, scout. Claire leaned back, watching the tent stand tall against the twilight. You know, she said, voice teasing. I think you're officially part of this family camping disaster. Ted smiled, heart full. Best promotion I've ever had. Later, as stars spilled across the sky, Claire sat beside Ted by the fire, Evan snoring softly in the tent. Ted handed her a mug of cocoa, their shoulders brushing. Thanks, she whispered. For what? He asked. For showing up, she said simply. For choosing. Ted looked at her, the firelight dancing in her eyes, and felt that same quiet certainty he'd been chasing for years. Always, he said, and for the first time in a long time, he believed it.